But if it's oh, there we go. Oh, that's great. Nice, nice.
We test the mic just a little bit, like I'm sure you can. People showing up. Yeah.
One, two, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2. Testing, testing. 1, 2. Once upon a time, they cast out and reeled in a big steelhead trout. It was a big fish. Can I turn it up a little bit? Can you hear okay? 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hey, lady. Good to see you. Just check in with Conchetta if you can find. Hey, take a seat anywhere, right next to Mr. Bean if you want. What do you think? Are we good? Sure, that's fine. Yeah, good. All righty. Let me just put this away. Are we right at 7 o'clock?
Yes.
Good deal. All right, friends, should we get the show on the road here? Welcome, everybody. Happy St. Patty's Day. Happy Goddesses Day. Happy Druids Day. Happy day to all who blessed, sanctified the island of Ireland. And we like to start out, as we always do here, for Irish material with the imbibing of fermented and or distilled beverages. Sláinte, good to have you here. And Sláinte to all those who are out in internet Zoom land. Welcome. You want to just give them a cheer for showing up? Thank you. Aaron Gora, yes. We have an international audience, meaning there are people from Canada here online. That's right, foreigners, that's right. Well, thank you for coming, everybody. Whoever has been at my events before know that we stay true to the protocol for an Irish oral recitation. We begin with the imbibing of fermented distilled beverages. We have a poem. We follow that with a song. We follow that with a couple stories. We follow that with a sad farewell song. We follow that with more imbibing of fermented and distilled beverages. And we follow that with fighting, feats of strength, and negotiations of refunds. That's always the liveliest part of the evening. So I want to give you a poem. I was raised, went to school my first 8 years, first grade through 8th grade, in an Irish Catholic school. Nuns, all the priests were like Father Fitzpatrick, Father Kelly, Father O'Donnell, Father O'Connell, you know. I went to church, but my real church was outdoors, not so much indoors. But one day I saw an image that has stayed with me because it was kind of the bringing together of scripture and nature. And it's always stayed with me. I wrote a little poem about it. Some images last a lifetime. I can still see the young priest, Father Kelly, black-robed, slender, walking in the weedy field beside our grade school in the late afternoons, reading his holy book. I was 9, and I wondered what could compel a man to such stillness and such peace in a world of such haste and such distraction. Years later, a church was built in that field. I confessed my sins, sang hymns, attended masses, weddings, and funerals there. But to this day, I still see a holy man walking in a field, reading a book, his head bowed to scripture, his feet reading the sacred manuscript of the land, a common prayer of strolling through a church that always had been and always will be. I knew then, but I didn't have the words. Nature is a religion. The earth is a church. Temples abound everywhere, and hymns are sung unceasing by every creature. So, Father Kelly, wherever you are, thank you. So let's sing a song. I actually printed out the words for you here, and this is a song that was written in the 1800s. David Bean, Don Hines, and I remember those times well in Ireland. And it's called "A Star of the County Down." Some of you might have heard it. Lorena McKinnon has sung it. Sinead O'Connor sung it. And I just want you to help me out with a chorus. It goes, from Bantry Bay to the Derry Quay, from Galway to Dublin town. No maid I've seen like the fair Colleen that I met in the county down. Good. All right. You got it. Great. And you know, when you sing with me, I'm always willing to sacrifice pitch and tune on the altar of volume and enthusiasm. Okay. All right. So if you know the words, sing the rest of it with me too. Oh, there's a term in here you might not know, which is Borin Green. So she comes down a Borin Green. That's just kind of a grassy track out of the country. All right. Near Bainbridge town in the county down one morning last July, down a Borin Green came a sweet Colleen, and she smiled as she passed me by. She looked so sweet from her 2 bare feet to the sheen of her nut brown hair. Such a coaxing elf, sure I shook myself to make sure I was really there. From Bantry Bay to the Derry Quay, from Galway to Dublin town. No maid I seen like the fair Colleen that I met in the county down. As she onward sped, sure I turned my head, and I felt with a feeling rare. And I said, says I, to a passer-by, who's the maid with the nut brown hair? He smiled at me, and with pride said he, she's a gem in Ireland's crown. Young Rosie McCann from the banks of the Bann, she's the star of the county down. From Bantry Bay to the Derry Quay, from Galway to Dublin town. No maid I've seen like the fair Colleen that I met in the county down. She'd a soft brown eye and a look so sly and a smile like the rose in June. and you heard each note from her auburn throat as she sung lamenting tunes. At the pattern dance, you'd be in a trance as she skipped to a jig or reel. Her eyes she'd roll, it'd touch your soul, and your heart she'd lightly steal. From Bantry Bay to the Derry Quay, from Galway to Dublin town. No maid I've seen like the fair Colleen that I met in the county down. At the autumn fair she'll be surely there, so I'll come with my Sunday clothes. With me hat cocked right and my shoes shone bright, and a smile for my nut brown rose. No horse I'll yoke, no pipe I'll smoke, till the rust in me plough turns brown. And a smiling bride by my own fireside sits the star of the county down. From Bantry Bay to the Derry Quay, from Galway to Dublin town. No maid I've seen like the fair Colleen that I met in the county down. No maid I've seen like the fair Colleen that I met in the county down. Give yourselves a hand. Wonderful. Well done. Good. One thing I love about that song is that it just shows the overarching confidence of men. You know, like here's like possibly the most gorgeous woman in all of Ireland. And he thinks, right, if I just show up with my Sunday clothes, right, and my hat's cocked right, my shoes are shown, that should do it, don't you think? Exactly.
It's worked for you.
It's worked for me so far. Well said. I knew it'd be a rough crowd tonight. Hey, before we go on, I want to thank my friend Jennifer Danlook, who is the proprietor of this place. And she and her allies back there, Sophia and Sage, are making up the good food and serving it. Tip them generously. Thank you. And I want to thank Jennifer for opening up this incredible place to poetry, stand-up comedy, music, and even storytelling. Thank you. And Jennifer has been in this neighborhood since, is it 2004? Wow. Because this place used to be down the block a little ways, and she had poetry readings there too, right? Yeah, yeah. So, and you've been here since 2010? Right. And take a look at the schedule if you haven't already, because it's every Friday, isn't that right, Jennifer? There's something going on? Yeah, there's something going on here. And this place has become the cultural and cuisine center of Lair Hill, right? To you, Jennifer, thank you so much for bringing us here. The program tonight is called Tales from the Hedgerows. And it comes from a rather dire time in Irish history, of which there were many. But this era is approximately 1650 to 1800, a time when the British Crown was doing its best to make of Ireland its first colony. And what they did from 1695 to 1771, they passed a series of brutal repressive laws called the Penal Code. And one of the most devastating effects was they were able to wrest land away from Irish Catholics, who were 90% of the population. By 1700, they owned 10% of the land. So they had become basically sharecroppers and tenants on their own soil. So not given any economic opportunity or educational opportunity, they were in danger of having the entire Gaelic culture rendered threadbare. What happened at that time, however, was that thousands of men and women stood up to be called hedgerow teachers. Now, the penal codes forbade teaching in Gaelic. They forbade the teaching of Irish history. They forbade Catholic masses. Priests were imprisoned. Gaelic schools were burned down. It was illegal to teach. So everything was done in the secret of hedgerows, in barns, and in bothies. And this went on for years and years and years. They estimate there were 9,000 hedgerow schools, thousands and thousands of teachers, and close to 500,000 people, young and old, were educated during this period. And hedgerow teachers, sometimes they would be local people that had some formal education. Oftentimes they were itinerants. They were wandering scholars, poets, storytellers, and they traipsed far and wide through Ireland. And as they did, they went to the most remote places. And in so doing, they sort of stitched communities, far-flung places, and people together, giving them some idea that they weren't alone in this, that they were actually part of a great weaving of culture and a great weaving of community as well. Sometimes storytellers would be on the road, and they too would instruct students during the day in numbers and letters and history and language. But in the evenings, they might gather with some of the adults to have some straight talk about the most current events and also share some of the oldest tales to give people some idea of from whence and where they had come and of what they were made. And for his or her part, he would be given a bowl of local fare, usually potatoes with a bit of butter, maybe a piece of bacon. And if he was extremely lucky, there might be a touch of Owishkaba, the water of life. Slancha. I know. And so, as I was saying, if the British Crown wants to snuff out every lamp of learning in Ireland, it's going to be a tough road to hoe. They've outlawed everything from the penny whistle and the bagpipe, you know, the singing of songs in Gaelic, to the Catholic Mass, to the worship of the pagan Samhain and Imbolc and all of that. But you see, they've shot themselves in the foot by doing it. Because you see, the fastest way to get an Irishman or Irish woman to do anything is to pass a law against them doing it. Oh, and they'll do it. They'll do it well, just to spite you. And so now they've also made of every penny whistle and every Ulian pipe a revolutionary instrument, haven't they? Every Gaelic song, every jig and reel we dance now is an act of defiance. I don't mean to make light of a difficult situation, for indeed it is difficult. It's a hard time. Even now as we're speaking, there's hedgerow teachers. I know many of them. And what are they doing right now? They're making ink out of blackberries, taking goose quills, so they can help the children with numbers and letters. And those are the ones that have parchment or vellum to write upon. Others are handing out slates of stone and giving the students a nub of chalk, a sharpened stone to write with. And doing that, of course, in dark, dank, and drafty bothies and huts and barns and such. 'Tis a grave time. And the Crown would like to see us and every remnant of our culture in the grave as well. But they won't. Not if we do what we can here. Not if we care for what seeds we have among us now, to pass them among each other. Every tune you know, every history you know, every genealogy, every tale, every dance, you keep that alive as well as you can. Not only that, but tend to the roots that we have among us, the roots of community and kith and kin. And if we do that, I tell you, when this time passes, and it will pass, and when it does, there will be rooting and a shooting and a flowering and a fruiting of this culture and these people and this land like this world has never seen. Mark my words. Well, enough of my blather. You didn't come for a sermon, you came for a story, didn't you? Would you like to hear one of those? All right. Now, every story has to have a technique, a method to know if people are interested in a tale, are awake enough, sober enough to hear a tale. And so my method is this: I cry out, Erin! And if people want to hear a tale, they cry back, Gabra, it means long live Ireland. Erin! 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 Long, 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 long ago. Long before the Brits came to Ireland, before the Normans came here in the 13th century, long before the first longboats of the Vikings pulled up in the 9th century, before St. Patrick and the Christians came in the 5th, even before the Celts and the Gaels came here 1,000 years before him, there were still people here. There have been people here for 9,000 years. And among the first, there was a tribe of magnificent people, poets, magicians, beautiful, statuesque people, and they were called the Tua the Danan. You want to try it? The Tua the Danan. It means the tribe of Danu, the goddess Danu, the river goddess. The Danube is named for her. She's an ancient one. And they came to Ireland in their favorite mode of transportation, a cloud. They came in off mists from the sea. That's how they arrived, you know. And among them, the first to come was this powerful, large, generous-hearted man. His name was the Dogda. You want to try it? The Dog. It just means good father or all father. And he was all of that. He was generous to a fault. And the Dogda, he had a great appetite for life in general, but for food in particular. He would have loved it here, I'll tell you that one. Do any of you like to eat? Well, you know, they were lucky because not only did the Dogda love to eat, he liked to cook. And one of the three great gifts he brought to Ireland, the first one was a cauldron, a huge cooking pot, you see. And wasn't he always cutting stuff up and throwing it into the pot, you know? This venison and this boar meat and this vegetable and this herb and stirring it up, you know, and of course it would have this great aroma, and then the breezes would carry the aroma through the glens and over the hills, and the people, the Dog Day's been cooking. And they couldn't help themselves. They would follow the scent of it right to his home. And the thing about it was there was always enough for everybody. Whoever came was fed. And they say that whatever the Dogda served, it tended to nourish the deepest hunger. Whatever he put in your cup, it slaked the oldest thirst. But the magic of it was, no matter how many were fed, the cauldron always brimmed full again. Until those times when he would empty it, and then he would have the water of 10 different springs put into that. And then it became a great healing pool. And he would bring people, whoever it was that were injured or wounded on the inside or out, he would bring them into the healing pool, and in that way they would be made well again. And so the Dogda, he fed you, and he would nourish you, and he could heal you as well. But at times he had to fight. And he brought a weapon with him to Ireland, a club, huge club. It took 3 men to lift it, or just himself could lift it too. Now, most of the men of those ages, they were more high tech, you know. They had spears. But the Dogda was old school, you might say. He was so old school back then, it was just called school. You know, everything was fucking old back then. His club was enormous. And he used to say, this club is so powerful that with one blow, I can smite 9 warriors with one blow. But on the other end of it, you see, there's a little hazel sprig. And with that, I could heal a wound or bring him right back to life, you see. Because it's more important to heal a wound than to make one. And more important to learn how to stop a war rather than to start one, because that's easily enough done, isn't it? Well, the Dogda also had a third gift he brought to Ireland. A harp. A harp as tall as he was, a huge harp made of oak, elaborately decorated. And it was called, he named it Una. You want to try that? It was Una, beautiful harp. And the music that came from it, he said, it could raise mirth in any soul. It could assuage any grief. It could even remove fear from the heart of warriors. And they say when the Dogda played it at times, and only his fingers were strong enough to play it, it helped the seasons move from spring to summer and summer to fall. But the word of it, it happened to pass on to other people and other people and other people until finally it came to the ears of his mortal enemies, the Fomorians. It's kind of fun to say, ready? The Fomorians. And they were called that because they were formidable, huge people. And you see, they were in Ireland first. They were there before the Tua came. And so the Tua, they were sort of immigrants, you know, taking away the Fomorian social services and such, polluting the bloodlines and whatnot, stealing our jobs, you know. And so naturally, the Fomorians, they made war upon the Tua de Dan. And they found out about this harp, and they said, you know what? If we had the harp, wouldn't we have that power now? We could instill courage in the hearts of warriors. We could make the seasons move in whatever way we wanted. Let's get the harp. So they did. They enticed the Tuatha De Danann in this great battle, this massive battle. And they kept giving them ground and more ground, because what they did is they sent a troop of their own in secret behind the lines into the lightly guarded Dun fort of the Tuatha. They found the harp and they took it, and away they went. And when the Dagda and his troop came back, they were brokenhearted. And he said, we've got to get it back. We can't be the Tuatha De Danann not without that harp. I have to have it. Who will go with me to get it? Who will go with me to get the harp? The people then were as silent as you are now. Because didn't everybody know that if you went away with a dog to get the harp, you probably wouldn't come back with a harp, and probably not your life as well. And so they were silent until one arm went way, way up. It was Lou of the long arm. You want to try it? Lou of the long arm. And they called him that because, well, what do you think? He had a... You're absolutely right, he did. And with the long arm, he could cast a spear, you see, farther and more accurately and with greater power than any warrior. So he was a good man to have on your side. And the other one who raised his hand was Angus Og the Artificer. That's kind of fun too, right? Angus Og the Artificer. And of course, an artificer is sort of a combination of a carpenter and an engineer and a designer, and he can conjure up just about anything you'd need on any adventure. He's a good man to have. So they set off, these three, and it took a long time, traveling through the hills, through the deep valleys, and finally the dog just said, I think that's it. Look at that. You see, the Fomorians, they the harp, and they gathered the other troops, and they found a dun fort, a hill fort, way, way off in the distance. And as the dog and the other two, as they neared the place, they could hear the Fomorians sleeping, because the Fomorians were famous for snoring. And they were just... You could just hear this. You want to try it? It's kind of fun. Just like that. And they were snoring so loudly. The dog and the others, they opened the door. And they... Oh, Jesus, there it is. Look at that. They put it up on the wall like it was like a trophy of a stag's head or something. They had Una, the harp, pinned to the stone wall back there, tied with leather thongs to the wall, Oh, the dog, he longed to have that harp back, and he reached out to it. He cried, come on now. And the harp longed to be with him, because only he could play it, make music from it, And sure enough, because he longed for it so much, the harp itself, it broke away from the wall, broke the thongs. And it was an amazing sight. You could see the thing floating through the air. This massive harp is floating through the air. But as it did that, you see, some say it was the air passing through the strings that made music. Others say, no. It's when it broke from the wall, whatever it is. The Fomorians, a few of them, they woke up. And they said, Jesus, what is that? And just like that, they roused everyone and they looked up. They saw the harp. And now they knew that not only would they get the harp back, they would have 3 more trophies to pin up on their wall. The heads of the Dagda, Lou of the, and Angus Og the Artificer. Exactly. Well, just as the harp floated down and came into the arms of the Dagda, the Fomorians raised their arms, and with fire in their eyes, they cried out with a great bloodlust. And they came right for those 3. And at that moment, Lou of the long arm, who was quite brilliant, he said to the Dagda, I couldn't be happier, Dagda, that you and your harp have been reunited. However, I'm under the impression here that our little victory, as well as our lives, may be short-lived. And the Dagda said, oh, I see what you mean, Lou. Because, there is nothing so formidable as a Fomorian warrior, with fire in his eyes and bloodlust in his heart, and coming right at you with sharpened swords and spears. And he said, but son, I want to tell you something, and I want to make sure you never, ever forget. Although the power of the Fomorians is indeed formidable, the magic of the Tuatha De Danann is as well. And just like that, he struck the strings of them. And this sound emanated from it, like something no one had ever heard before. It was this loud, wild, beautiful sound. And it was like the four Mormons like crashed into it. They couldn't get any farther. And then he struck it again, and a sound of such sweetness and happiness and mirth came out of the harp. They couldn't help themselves. It was so playful and so delightful. They just began to remember every beautiful, sweet thing they'd ever known. And he kept playing, and they started dancing and twirling around, and they dropped their swords and spears, and they were embracing each other like they were so many children, just laughing and playing and dancing away, on and on and on they were dancing. But the tune came to an end. And didn't they remember, hey, wait, aren't we warriors here? I think we have a mission to fulfill here. And once again, they picked up the swords, and they made their way right to the three of them. But just like that, once again, the dog, they plucked the strings. And this time out of the harp, there came a music that was so melancholy, so sad, so full of grief and woe. For, don't they say the world is made of a third water? Isn't that the idea? 2/3 of water. And our bodies are made of 2/3 of water. Well, much of that is tears, actually. Because isn't there great woe and grief and pain in this world? And with that music, those Fomorian warriors, they remembered every sad and hard and difficult thing, every wound they'd given, every wound they'd taken, and they just laid down and they wept and they consoled one another, and tears just ran down their faces. They wept and wept. And that soon came to an end. Once again, they remembered, we are warriors. And they picked up their arms, and just as they renewed the charge, a final tune came off the harp. It was the sweetest lullaby you'd ever heard. And wouldn't you be a little tired after all that weeping and all that playing, Well, the two of them, they were exhausted. I mean, the four Mars, they were exhausted. And as that music came to them, they couldn't help themselves. They just laid down their weapons, and they lay down and they curled up and they just went to sleep. And it was the sweetest thing. They were just laying on top of each other, snoring away. But there is nothing so vulnerable as someone asleep, right? And after all, the two of them down, and they were warriors, and they knew here was a moment. Perhaps they could end it once and for all, couldn't they? And the dog, didn't he have the great club? In lieu of the long arm, the spear. And of course, Angus Og the artificer was a swordsman of some renown. And so Angus Og, he sheathed his sword. In lieu of the long arm, he held back the spear. And the dog just simply put his club on his shoulder. Boys, let him sleep. Let him sleep. Who knows? Perhaps they'll dream a dream of a time when we the two of the down, and they, the Fomorians, can meet somewhere other than a field of battle. Let them see if they can dream a dream like that. And so it was. The three of them made their way out and left the Fomorians to sleep and to dream. They made their way all the way back. And ever since then, the harp has become the symbol of Ireland itself, And ever since then, we remember the Dagda and what he told Louis the Long Arm and the others. The power of the Fomorians is formidable, and never forget the magic of the Tuatha Dé Danann is as well. To that magic, Sláinte. Hey. It's good to remember here and now in these times, I think, because the might of the British Crown is formidable. No doubt about it. But the magic of the Celts and the Gael is as well. And it is more like the magic of the harp and the magic of the lyric and the magic of the tune and the magic of the poem and such. Because you see, there have been people on this island for 9,000 years. The great tombs of Noth and Doth and Newgrange were built 4,500 years ago, earlier than the pyramids. And to this day, they were arranged so perfectly that every winter solstice, the sun perfectly penetrates that long portal chamber and lights up the entire womb of it with the fresh seed of the sun. Are you noticing the rather sexual nature of this phenomenon here? It's a beautiful thing. But do you think those people might have known a thing or two about astronomy, engineering, architecture, design, construction? Oh, they did. Not only that, they knew how to preserve it and transmit it through the oral tradition, through poems and stories and songs and such. And it was into that place later on that the Celts came, 1,000 years before St. Patrick set foot upon Ireland, with the Druids, of course. And they, in that same way, the Druids, the men of oak, instructed the Shanachis, the tellers, and the Olams, the poets in the oak groves, how to be the living libraries of their people through verse and poem and song, to transmit and to hold on to genealogies and histories and customs and codes and crafts, everything about agriculture, everything about hunting and fishing. And it was that mastery of language and that ability to transmit and to educate that later became the generations of scholars and monks and scribes after the Christians arrived and brought the written word. It was that fertile Celtic imagination and mastery with language that exploded onto the scrolls and onto the books, writing down all the classic texts of Greece, writing down the Christian theologies, writing down every myth and fable and legend and song and poem they knew. So it was that the monasteries became centers of learning, and those wise ones, knowledgeable ones, were invited to Europe during the darkest ages, where they taught in monasteries, respected by kings and nobles, who sent their people to Ireland to study in those monasteries. For 500 years, this exchange occurred, giving Ireland the name, the island of saints and scholars. Just a rather wordy way of saying there's been a germ of knowledge in us for a while, isn't there? A bit of brilliance, you might say, a bit of the flame, a bit of the seed of how to transmit information, which you see is why this penal code is such a bitter pill to swallow, and we won't be swallowing it. I don't care how big a gravestone the Crown wants to lay upon the seed of Irish brilliance. It'll break through. Like a weed, it'll find its way through the cracks right to the sun. And speaking of gravestones, it sort of reminds me of a story. Did you want to hear that one? Aaron! 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 You would have loved this king, you see, this king of Connaught. His name was Guare. You want to try that one? Guare. He was a man of amazing hospitality. And he was the king of Connaught, you know, the wild western part of Ireland. Beautiful place, rugged, rocky place. Takes the full brunt of the Atlantic weathers, you know. And he had in his service a high poet whose name was Sentian. Good man, knowledgeable man, respectful man. But Sentian had some poets in his service. A bit rude. A bit, can you imagine? I know. Almost as insufferable as storytellers, the poets. Now, the good King Guare, he had entertained and hosted these poets for 2 months, filling their cups with mead, you know, putting a roof over their heads and such. And they had become rather obstreperous, you might say, worn out their welcome. And one night, one of the serving maidens there, she was attending one of the tables of the poets. And one of them cried out, "Wench, over here, fill up a cup here to the brim, the way your bosom fills that blouse with you there." And she was embarrassed. She dropped the cup and she ran off. And the table of poets, they just laughed and laughed and laughed until they didn't. Because they noticed that the king's brother, whose name was Morvaugh. You want to try that? Morvaugh. It's a name that literally means dead man. Now, Morvaugh was quite alive. But to be in his presence, you had the feeling your own mortality could be at risk. He had a rather lethal demeanor about him. He stood up, and he was not a theater goer. Wow. Not a thespian. He was sick and tired, and he finally said, "Enough of you poets! Long has my brother greased your knives with good meat, and filled your cups with ale and mead, and put a roof over your head, and a good place by the fire. And what have you given us? The dry dust of poor verse, ill-rhymed little couplets, thrice-told tales from mealy mouths and sharp, untutored tongues. I swear to you, the babble of my half-mad grandmother puts your best efforts to shame. You who have taken now will give to us a tale worthy of this hall and worthy of that king. You will bring to us a tale of the gods and the fighting men, of the great Queen Maeve, of Cuchulainn, the Irish hero. You will give us the tale of the Tain Bo Calain, the cattle raid of Cooley. Everyone looked at each other, for all had heard of the tale, but no one had heard the tale because it was lost. It had disappeared in the mists of time. It had gone through the nets of the memory of the poets and the tellers. And Sentian, the chief poet, he stood up and he said, Morvan, I apologize for the behavior of these poets, and they will be castigated roundly. Mark my word. But the Tain Bo Calain, it can't be told, Morvan. It no longer exists in this world. Well then, I guess you'll have to go to the other world to get it, won't you? But I'll tell you this, you'll be telling it by the time the blossoms are on the trees. And if you don't, your position as high poet, you'll no longer hold it. And your neck will no longer hold your head. Bring the tale of the Tain Bo Calain. It was the kind of a challenge and a demand that only the brother of a king, only a nobleman could make. Now, it wasn't uncommon for a nobleman, a king, to request of the chief poet a certain story, a certain poem, but it was uncommon to request the impossible and to put at the price of failure one's head. It was a hard measure, and Morvan was nothing if not a hard man. And the challenge stood and it had to be met. And so Sentian, he did what any of us would probably do. He began to sort of cast about to find out who might have a thread of the tale. He sent messengers out to Ulster and Leinster and Munster and all through Connaught. And sure enough, little by little, people came. This poet here and that storyteller, and anyone that had any piece of the tale, a sliver of it would come. And day upon day, week upon week, they did that. They would gather and they would tell the tales. People would come to listen, you know. Weeks went by, months went by. And finally, by doing all of that, after all those months, Sentian finally had nothing. Absolutely nothing. He had a few shards, but nothing you could make the pot from. He had a few bones, but you couldn't reconstruct the whole frame to find out how the flesh might look, you know. So he went to the druid that had trained him, and he told him the whole story. And the druid, he thought, and he said, well, no. You know this Morvan, the one who opposed you, who caused all the trouble? He might have given you a clue through the trouble as well. Because if you can't find it in this world, you have to go to the... I suggest you get away from this place. Go to where the veil is the thinnest between the two worlds, and that would be the great hill, the navel of Ireland itself, the hill of Ishnuk. It is the very center of Ireland. It's a massive hill. From the top of it, you can see 20 counties in all directions. It was there for thousands of years. The pagans lit the Beltane fire, as you see. Not only that, but on that hill, there was the Al Namurin, the stone of the four divisions, a huge stone, taller than a man, wider than a man is tall, and split perfectly into four pieces, each one representing the four provinces of Ireland. But even more, beneath that stone, they say, is the resting place of Erin, the goddess for whom Ireland is named. And so, like some ancient Greek often was way to find the oracle, you know, Sentian, who was old now, made his way the long walk through every kind of wind and weather, up and up and up. And finally, indeed, he did come to the hill of Ishnuk, to the great stone, and he stayed there for a long time. Just in silence. Because the druid sometimes said the stones are the bones of the earth, and the bones and the stones hold the oldest memories of the earth. Sometimes you can get a word from them. Some say it was a tune that came out. Some say it was words spoken. Some say, no. Sentian had a dream. Whatever it was, the words that were spoken to him was a name, and the name was Fergus McRoy. Fergus McRoy. I want to get Fergus McRoy. And he knew right away, Fergus McRoy. I remember now. He's the one. He's the great warrior. He was the bard. He knows the Tain Bo Calain. He knows the Tain Bo Calain. Ah, he was so happy. But there was a problem. Maybe two. The first one being that Fergus McRoy was from Ulster, the province of Ulster. Ishnook was in Leinster. It was a fair walk to get there. The second problem was that Fergus McRoy had been dead about 5 centuries. Making a conversation with him about the Táin Bó Cúailnge, or anything else for that matter, rather unlikely, impractical. But then again, when had impracticality ever kept an Irishman from doing anything? And sure enough, Senchin, the old man, he made his way now, all the way to Ulster. And couldn't you see him now? Just traipsing over rocky hills, you know, going along the sides of these wide fens, these marshes, through the deepest leafy glens and through the deep woods. On and on he would finally come into Ulster, and he cast about here now, asking this person and that person, this one, that one, about Fergus McRoy. And finally they led him to this enormous graveyard, an ancient graveyard with huge gravestones. And many of them had the Ogham script, the ancient form of writing, carved into the stone. Now, by the time he arrived, it was dusk, which is when all the great stuff happened. Oh, the wind blew, it was cold, and he found shelter behind a big gravestone there. Pulled his cloak up around him, put his hand upon the stone, and he could feel the Ogham script, and he could read the Ogham script. You know how they sometimes say, if you make the boat, the world will bring you the ocean? And couldn't you say that, in a way, Fergus had sort of made the boat, you know, all the work he'd done over time, sort of like a little craft? Well, when he put his hands on the stone, the tide of the world came in, for he realized this was the gravestone of Fergus McRoy. He was elated. Because all he had to do now was conjure back to life a man who'd been dead for 500 years. Shouldn't be too hard. He pleaded with Fergus McRoy. He said, Fergus, please, that the Táin Bó Cúailnge, that the great story might live again, that all those characters and scenes could come to life again. Please give me the tale. I'll care for it. I swear to you, it'll never be lost again, Fergus, please. He stayed there a day, another day. He would sing, he would speak poems to the poet. He said, Fergus, please, you know, tough times I know will be coming to Ireland. And you know, the medicine for we Gaels, you know, it's the poem and the story and the song and the lyric. Give us that it may live again. It was just silence. And on the third day, he knew that he failed. He understood that Táin would not be told in Ireland ever again. And the full weight of that came to them, what that meant, because it wasn't just some tale told by some person long ago. The Táin Bó Cúailnge was hundreds and hundreds of tales told by hundreds and hundreds of people over time, many, many years. It was a vast tapestry that represented an entire race of people. And when that was gone, so were they. And when the full weight of that came to him, and the fact, for lack of the storytellers and the poets to hold on to it, it broke his heart. And he laid down and he wept for a long time. And he remembered something that the Druids told him, which is sometimes the ones on the other side, they hear best when our words are spoken from a broken heart. And he wept and he wept. And some say it was the warm tears that carried the words of Fergus, or rather of Senchin, down into the grave and upon the bones of Fergus. Whatever it was, who knows? All I know is this much. When he finally dried his eyes and Senchin looked up and up, 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 up. Fergus McRoy was a huge man. The name itself means great horse or stallion. He was the favorite consort of Queen Maeve herself, who said normally it takes 32 men to satisfy me, or one night with Fergus McRoy. His testicles alone were large as sacks of flour. But men take heart, because the Druids used to say, it isn't the size of the magician's wand, it's the magic of the magician. That's how I console myself anyway. He was an enormous man. Not only that, he had this beautiful, deeply woven green tunic, this cloak. It fell all the way to his knees. You can see this, the hilt of his sword there, a beautiful gold torque around his neck. He had hair down his back and these fierce blue eyes, and he stood before Senshin, and he peered right down at him, right through him, and he said, "So you wanted to hear the Tain Bo Calain, did you?" "I do, sir. I do." "You know, it's a long tale. You know that?" "I've heard." "All right. Well, listen well this time, because I'm not going to be telling the story in the world again. You got that?" "I'll listen well." So it was Fergus McRoy, they say, uncorked the valve of his voice. He unleashed his word hoard from his heart, his memory, his imagination. And they say language flowed forth from Fergus McMorris like a great river that spoke and washed and tumbled downstream. And Senshin had a memory like a great sponge. It just soaked everything up. Hours went on, and he could smell the fires and see the warriors around them. He could hear the battle cries, the clash of weapons, every sound and touch and taste. And they say the memory of Senshin was like a vast mansion, and every shelf, every room was filled with the Tain Bo Calain as the sun rose and Fergus McRoy disappeared into the mist. But not before Senshin had thanked him. And he said, "I swear to you, great bard and warrior, this story, it will live." Senshin was old. He was weary, but he was so happy. And there was a spring in his step now, you know. And he turned to make the long journey home. And just as there was a spring in his step, didn't he notice that spring was in the air as well? And of course, the first blossoms would be on the trees. And the time would be coming. And he arrived home, and who was the first one to greet him warmly? Morvan. "Well, we thought you'd been gone for good," which would have been good riddance. "But we'll see in 3 days' time what you're made of." 3 days later, the feasting hall filled. There was throngs of people that came. And among them, of course, were rapscallions and ne'er-do-wells hired by Morvan, plied with ale and mead, to jeer at any word that the storyteller mangled. And you could hear him loud. And then as Senshin came to the stage and took the harp, there was a lull, a quiet. And within a few minutes later, for he was a master teller of tales, if you had looked in one of the windows, you would have seen even one of the toughest bullies there, his mouth agape, his eyes like a little child just watching. For they say that night, Senshin didn't just tell the tale of the Tain Bo Calain. He brought the Tain Bo Calain into the hall. People watched as Cahulan, the great Irish Hercules, was surrounded by enemies. And they came for him with sword and spear. And he leapt up, did the salmon leap, flew up, twisted into the air, landed on the point of his spear, dove back down to fight his enemies. They watched as later he battled at the river ford, battled his own foster brother, Ferdian. And by day after day, they inflicted wounds upon each other that only brothers can inflict upon each other. By night, they fed each other and tended to each other's wounds. And they listened to every clash of weapon. They listened to the of Morrigan, the battle goddess, change her shape from woman into raven and fly high above the carnage. They could feel the earth shake as the two greatest bulls of Ireland locked horns. All of the chariots, all of the hoofbeats, every taste and sound and smell was there as the tale wore on, and at long last, Senshin had woven every character, every scene, every setting perfectly. And the entire tapestry, the whole fabric of the Tain Bo Calain was complete and full and whole. And the people at last, though weary, as I'm sure you are by now, they cheered their poet, for at last the Tain lived again among them. And then as there was silence, they heard something, and they looked, and they saw the great doorway open of the feasting hall. And they gasped. For there in the door frame, there was a great ancient warrior dressed in a green tunic, with a sword by his side, a gold torque upon his neck. And they watched as Fergus McRoy himself came forward through the hall. And because all eyes were upon him, none had noticed that Senshin the poet, having given life to the Tain Beauculain, he ended his own life in that very place. His life had expired. Fergus McRoy came in and knelt to him, put his hand upon his breast, turned to all and said, "Behold, Senshin, your poet, has done what few have or ever will, has brought a tale from the other world to this world that it will live. And I tell you this, he will live." And that great warrior, he picked up this frail little poet, like it was a child, cradled his head. He will live among the bards and the poets in the other world now. And they watched as Fergus McRoy took Senshin out of the hall, out of this world, and into the other. And in time, the King Guare, he gathered all together. And he said, to the generosity of the ancestor, Fergus McRoy, who came forward to bring the tale to us, to our own Senshin, who gave his own life that the Tain Beauculain could live again. And to tell you, it does live to this day. It has been told countless, countless times. It has been printed in books, preserved upon shelves, but I know this for a fact. It has never been told. Never, ever will it be told the way that Senshin the poet told it that night. The feasting hall of King Guare, Connaught, Ireland. To Senshin, to Fergus McRoy. Sláinte. Thank you. Well, one of the things about Senshin and about the hedgerow teachers now, they are teachers, they're passing on information. And what I'd like to do is bring some of the teachers that we know that have touched us into the room. So I want you to think about someone who's taught you something. Maybe it's a craft. Maybe they taught you something about yourself. Maybe they taught you a subject that you're now interested in. Whatever it was, somebody taught you something. That's one of the reasons that the teaching goes on and on and on, because people pass on what they know. Just turn to someone next to you. Just mention someone who taught you something and maybe something about what they taught you. Just so we can bring. Just turn to someone next to you. Mention a name. Robert Flanagan. He taught me baseball. Thank you. She got you to be happy. Beautiful. Yeah. So let's raise a glass to all of those teachers whose names are in the room and out there in Zoom land as well. All the teachers that represented by all the folks that are online there too. To all the teachers that have mentored, taught, and assisted us. Cheers, Sláinte. You're welcome. Well, the story's a little heavy, aren't they? We lighten things up a little bit. Jeez, I tell you, storytellers. Well, one of the ways, of course, the Celts like to lighten stuff up is with a song. That's one of the ways that we carry heavy things, is to make up songs about them, right? And sometimes the heaviest things have to be carried with a song. It's the only way we can endure them. And here's a song that came out of a poem, and the poem came out of an experience. In 1649, when Oliver Cromwell arrived in Ireland, Oliver Cromwell arrived in Ireland, he brought in 10,000 foot soldiers, 4,000 horsemen. They massacred many of the Irish. Incredibly brutal. And to many more, they said, with the rest of you that survived, to hell with you, or you can move to Connaught, you see. What that meant was this. Connaught is a beautiful place, but it's rocky, not a lot of arable land. But the Irish, many of them, they wanted to survive, they wanted to live, so they moved from the most arable places in Ireland, the best land, and they moved to Connaught. But year upon year upon year, there was a sad custom that developed, you see. There was not enough employment or land for the young men. And so what they would do in May or June, when the paths had dried, when the rivers were low enough where you could ford them, they would make their way about 150 miles from Connaught along the rocky road to Dublin. And there they would find employment if they could. If they couldn't, which they often couldn't, they would go down to the quay, the dock, and get on a boat to Liverpool. See if they could get to work there. Oftentimes never, ever to return to Ireland. Because as it was then, as it is now, the greatest export of Ireland is what? Her people, exactly. So there's a little story song about a young man who's about to leave the little village of Tuam. Tuam is in the province of Connaught, and get on the rocky road to Dublin. He puts on a new pair of brogues, which is a kind of shoe. He cuts a stout blackthorn, one of these, right, for a walking staff, and he makes his way to Dublin. It goes like this. Oh, by the way, the chorus is right there on the pages. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hunt the hare and turn her down the rocky road all the way to Dublin. Whack Filaldi Raw. Whack Filaldi Raw. It's an ancient Gaelic expression. And from my research, I've been able to find out that it means whack Filaldi Raw. So just so you know, I'm doing my work up here. All right. In the merry month of June, when first from home I started, kissed the girls of Tuam, left them nearly broken-hearted, shook hands with father dear, kissed me darling mother, drank a pint of beer, my tears and grief to smother. Then off to reap the corn, leave where I was born, I cut a stout blackthorn, to banish ghost and goblin, with a pair of brand new brogues, rattling o'er the bogs, frightening all the dogs, on the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hunt the hare and turn her, down the rocky road, all the way to Dublin. Whack Filaldi Raw. At Mullingar that night I rested, limbs so weary, started by daylight, me spirits bright and airy. I took a drop of the pure to keep me heart from sinking, for that's a Paddy's cure when he's troubled with his thinking. To see the lasses smile, laughing all the while at me curious style, it kept me heart a bubbling. They asked if I was hired, what wages I required, until I almost tired of the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hunt the hare and turn her, down the rocky road, all the way to Dublin. Whack Filaldi Raw. In Dublin I arrived and thought it was a pity to be so soon deprived of view of that fine city. Then I took a stroll all among the quality. Me bundle it was stole within that neat locality. Something crossed me mind, and so I looked behind. No longer could I find me bundle on me stick a wobbling. Inquiring for the rogue, they said, "You're Connaught brogue. It isn't much in vogue on the rocky road to Dublin." 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hunt the hare and turn her, down the rocky road, all the way to Dublin. Whack Filaldi Raw. Got myself out of that, me spirits never failing. I landed at the quay just as the ship was sailing. Captain to me roared and said that no room had he, but when I jumped aboard, a cabin they found for Paddy. Down among the pigs I danced a rummy rig and played a hearty jig with the ocean round me bubbling. Off the coast of Holyhead I wish that I was dead, or safely put to bed on the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hunt the hare and turn her, down the rocky road, all the way to Dublin. Whack Filaldi Raw. Well, the boys of Liverpool, when we safely landed, they called me self a fool, till I could no longer stand it. Then poor Erin's Isle they began abusing, my blood began to boil, my temper I was losing. Hurrah, me boys, says I, let my shillelagh fly. Some Galway boys were nigh and saw I was a hobbling, and with a loud hooray they joined me in the fray. We quickly cleared the way on the rocky road to Dublin. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hunt the hare and turn her, down the rocky road, all the way to Dublin. Whack Filaldi Raw. Give yourselves a hand. Beautiful. Aye. It's a perfect Irish song. It starts out with a pint of beer, ends with a fist fight, right? And the Irish, they lose a lot of battles, but they win all the fist fights. Believe me that. But now it's getting late. Time's moving on. Now we have cows to milk, chickens to grain, and children to feed tomorrow, don't we now? Hey, not so much. Just one more thought before we part here. You see, there was this great warrior, Finn McCool. Finn McCool, he was a poet as well as a warrior. And he was the leader of a band of poet warriors. They knew tomes of poetry for good reason, because they lived by the old code. And the old code was this: never give a sword to a man that can't dance. They meant that. They meant it. That unless a man, right, had songs, tunes, rhythm in his bones, unless he had poems in his heart, stories in his brain, unless he had all of that, well, he might swing a sword well, but he also might never put it down. Because the Fianna knew more than anybody, there was nothing more intoxicating than warfare and battle cry and such. And so they, in particular, knew tomes of poetry. The Fianna, as well as that, they were as free and independent as anyone in Ireland had ever been. You see, they lived by foraging, by fishing, by hunting, by traipsing all around Ireland. They knew every stream, hilltop, leafy glen, sandy shore, all of it was home to them. Also, they owned no land. They owned nothing, no land, no cattle, nothing. They took that vow. They helped the common people, who often helped them by putting them up during the winter months. And they loved to have the Fianna there because they always had great stories about all their adventures, you see. But the Fianna also only married for love, never for dowry, never for inheritance. And after a while, word began to spread about these folk, this adventurous life they lived. Well, it was harder than hell, in fact. But one day, 4 sons of kings showed up to speak to Finn McCool. And they said, Finn, we've heard about these men, these Fianna, and we think we want to join, Finn said, well, that could be, But let me ask you something. Let me tell you a story. You tell me what you think about it. You see, there was once a king, and the king had 2 sons, and the king was getting up in years, and he was about to die, and he went to his son and says, now I'm going to split the kingdom up among you here, you two, and I want you to tell me what part you want the most. And the first one, the oldest one, said, well, I sort of like the castle, and the treasure room, the one with all the gold and all the silver, I'd like that. The mills too, the mills that'd be good to have, and the cattle and the sheep and the goats and the chickens, and the farms and the towns. That would do me. And the other son said, yeah, it suits me fine. Because what I've always wanted most is the flowing streams and the rocky hillsides and the mountainsides, the deepest of fens, the wild glens and all of that stuff, the strands of beach. And what I love most is the leaping salmon and the sound of the wild geese on a moonlit night. That'd do me. So Finn said to these 4 sons of kings, so what do you think? And they all said, well, seems to us sort of like the first brother, he got the best part of the deal, don't you think? Finn said, I don't know, who knows, I only know this much. Every man in the Fianna thinks the second son got the better deal. And I'll tell you this much too. No man who believes the first man got the best deal could ever be a part of the Fianna. They went off kind of shaking their heads. But the fact of the matter was, they say that the Fianna, although at times they served kings and served people, they said, it is the land of Ireland that we worship. It is Erin's land. For we know that this land is her body, the streams are her blood, and these winds and mists are her holy, holy breath. And they say, because of that, it was the Fianna that lived closest to the heart of Ireland. So it was for them way back then and there. So it will be and is for all of us right now, to Erin's land, Ireland. Sláinte. She actually speaks Gaelic, Irish. Oh, just enough though, just enough. Well, I want to thank you for coming, and just a short footnote here. Far from stamping out the Gaelic culture, the penal codes stamped it deeper into the memory of people. The Gaelic language, once outlawed in Ireland, is now a mandatory part of education up into secondary school. And in fact, over 400,000, they say closer to 500,000 people were educated in secret hedge schools for a period of over 150 years. And as I said, far from eradicating Gaelic culture, the Gaelic culture went on to influence William Butler Yeats, Lady Gregory, James Joyce, Oscar Wilde, George Bernard Shaw, Samuel Beckett, Sean O'Casey, Seamus Heaney, C.S. Lewis, Edna O'Brien, Eva Boland, Enya, Bono, Van Morrison, Sinead O'Connor, Shane McGowan. From the Dagda. Exactly, J.J. Singh. From the Dagda all the way to the Dubliners. From Turlough O'Carolan, the harpist, all the way to Macomb and Clancy. From Maureen O'Hara to Saoirse Ronan to feckin' Cillian Murphy. Not to mention countless poets and pipers, harpers and musicians and singers and playwrights and even lowly feckin' storytellers. There has been an outpouring of Gaelic and Celtic heart, imagination, and soul that continues to this day. And I want to thank all of you for helping me bring that to life on this night. Thank you. Happy St. Paddy's Day. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And I want to thank everybody that's been patiently sitting on their own couches, wherever you are. Thank you for being here too. And let's finish with a sad farewell song, all right? The refunds, that's later, after more drinking. That's after fighting, okay? Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all the comrades that e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away. And all the sweethearts that e'er I had, with a couple exceptions, they'd wish me one more day to stay. But all I've done, since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and softly call. Good night and joy be with you all. Good night and joy be with you all. Thanks for coming, everybody. Good night, all. Thank you. Oh, and also, before we go, I want to thank profuse thanks for my friend and techno wizard, Albert Chen. I could not have done any of this without Albert. You are an angel of the first degree, my friend. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Albert. All right.